organizers and those behind this forum for their commitment to renewal and strengthening the ties between the United States and China. It's very heartening at a time like today. It is a challenging time for U.S.-China relations. It's never been more important to maintain open dialogue between our countries. To provide some context for the conversations that will go on later today, I'd like to turn the clock back 25 years and see what lessons we can draw from recent history. In November 1999, the United States and China reached agreement on the terms of China's entry into the World Trade Organization. 6 months later, the US Congress voted to resume for the first time since 1949 permanent normal trade relations with China. And that paved the way for China's accession to the World Trade Organization in 2001. It was a time of great optimism about the future of US-China relations. The growth of Chinese exports to the United States and Europe accelerated, and every major corporation in the United States that did not yet have a strategy for investing in China began to develop. The number of Chinese students studying in US universities exploded from about 60,000 in the early 2000s to 400,000 on the eve of the pandemic. Jiang Zemin and his successor, Hu Jintao, made frequent mention of strengthening people-to-people connections between our two countries. And diplomatic relations reached a level of trust and cooperation during the administration of George W. Bush that exceeded that achieved by any other US administration since 1949. In that same year, 2001, Yale celebrated its 300th anniversary. We chose to make the internationalization of Yale the central theme of our tercentennial year, announcing for the first time that all undergraduates admitted to Yale from abroad would for the first time be eligible for full need-based financial aid. We wanted to open our doors. We also launched several new international studies professorships. We launched the Yale Study for the Center of Globalization and the World Fellows Program. A capstone of the tercentennial year was the first of my 24 trips to China as Yale's president, 2001, 2013. As if to signal the coming high tide of US-China relations, the Yale delegation in 2001 was treated like royalty. We were hosted at Dayutai. I had a lengthy conversation with Jiang Zemin and Zhang Nonghai. I met with Chen Zhili, the Minister of Education, as well as the presidents of Peking, Tsinghua, and Fudan universities. On our first day in Beijing, our visit was the lead story. It's hard to believe, but our visit was the lead story on television news throughout China and front page news in every newspaper in a day when people actually read physical newspapers. Perhaps this generous was meant to recognize Yale's historic significance in China. As I'm sure you know, the first Chinese student to receive a degree from an American university was Rong Hong, Yale College class of 1854. When Rong Hong returned home, he became a strong advocate for the modernization of China, and he persuaded the emperor to establish an educational mission that sent more than 100 Chinese young boys to preparatory schools up and down the Connecticut Valley, and then on to college in New England. More than 20 of these students came to Yale, most notably Zhou Tianyao, Zhang Tianyao, who became the national hero for his role in building the Chinese railroad system. But I think this generous attention was about more than Yale's history. It was meant to signal something more, to declare a desire on the part of the Chinese leadership to open channels of communication and exchange between Chinese and American scholars and scientists, and to learn more about America's successful system of higher education. Chinese had ambitions for its own universities, and they were eager to learn American practices. On that first visit, we dedicated two collaborative research, one at Beida and one at Fudan. And these were the first of research collaborations and exchanges that Yale and Chinese partners initiated during the decade that followed. The enthusiasm for these collaborations on both sides is hard to imagine today in an atmosphere where our governments deeply distrust one another. But at the time, such collaboration was encouraged by the Chinese Ministries of Education and Foreign Affairs, by the US State Department, and by the science funding agencies in both countries. On a subsequent visit in 2003, we met again with Chen Jili, then promoted to the State Counselor of Education for Education, Culture, and Sport. Recognizing Yale's interest in playing an active role in China's educational development, she asked us to work with the Ministry of Education to co-sponsor an annual meeting of Chinese university leaders and to teach them how American universities, research universities, were organized and why they thrived. And thus was born the China-Yale Educational Leadership Program, which convened every summer, alternately at Yale and on the campus of a leading Chinese university. This took place from 2004 to the end of my presidency a decade later. Nearly all the presidents and party secretaries from China's top universities attended at least one summer, as well as selected vice presidents, many of whom later became presidents. For the next 15 years, a majority of presidents of China's C9 universities were graduates of this Yale program. Discussion at this leadership program covered a wide range of topics that were all relevant to improving Chinese universities. For example, we discussed strategies for recruiting top-tier faculty, how to evaluate faculty for reappointment and promotion, how to allocate funding in science, how to build the fundraising operation, how to transfer technology into commercial use, and how undergraduate curriculum and pedagogy in the United States, and what China might gain from curricular pedagogical reform. In the first year or two, these discussions were mostly one way. We taught to our Chinese visitors. We described American practices, and our Chinese colleagues asked questions. But over time, we focused increasingly from the Chinese university leaders about their progress on reform, and we had some very lively discussions. Discussions were exhilarating as colleagues from both China and Yale weighed in with suggestions about how to overcome resistance to change. Many Chinese participants told us that this Yale program was the highlight of their year, and some university presidents like Xu Zhihong at Beida, Yang Wei at Zhejiang, and Zhang Lianming at Xianjiaotong found the program so stimulating that they attended 3 or 4 times. Through this whole period, 2001 to 2013, the number of Chinese students coming to Yale and to the United States kept rising, and so did the number of American students visiting China. At peak, about 300 to 400 Yale undergraduates, so a third of the class, or quarter or a third of the class, would go each summer to study in China, to study Chinese language, to do research, or to work as interns. In conversations with Chen Jili and her successor, Liu Yandong, her successor as state counselor, I learned underlying logic behind their insistence on the importance of people-to-people connections. The relationship between our governments, they said, would wax and wane. There would be times of stability and times of crisis, but a strong foundation of personal connections among leaders on both sides, nurtured as students and cultivated later and maintained later through vocational and professional connections, could mitigate the strains between governments and ensure stability in the long run. This hopeful premise, which so many of us shared in the early years of the 21st century, has been tested recently. Under the leadership of Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, China and America have turned inward, harboring deep suspicions of one another and developing separate supply chains to ensure national security. The academic collaboration that flourished and seemed so promising 15 and 20 years ago has been pretty dramatically curtailed. Although Chinese universities continue to produce varied results in science, pedagogical and curricular reform, based on Western models is no longer a priority. On the US side, no longer a priority, and the study of party doctrine has a renewed prominence in the curriculum. On the US side, Chinese students and postdocs have been excluded from research in areas deemed sensitive to national security, and not only national security, but also economic. And thousands of Chinese have had their revoked. Sorry. I'm trying to get back to my picture. Doesn't really matter. There are still some bright spots. This forum, for example, the Paul Tsai Center, the China Center at Yale Law School, and the Yale Center at Beijing, in Beijing still thrive. But the activities of many of you in the audience are nonetheless constrained by geopolitics. So these are troubled times, but I remain an optimist. My Chinese friends remind me that history moves in cycles. The empire long divided must unite. The empire long united must divide. Thus, it has ever been. You all know that. Today, the world is deeply interconnected. The US and China are too interdependent to divide permanently. I think that you can still rely on the advice given to me by Chen Jili and Liu Yandong. If you are Chinese, take advantage of your time here to form deep friendships with Americans that will endure through times of trouble. And if you're American, reach out and make friends with Chinese students and colleagues. The tensions between our nations will ultimately pass, and the repression that we're seeing in both will give way to greater freedom. A time of flourishing will come again. Thank you.